Okay, welcome back everyone to Connecting Our Kids and Solving the Homework Gap. I have with me today two very distinguished speakers. Mignon Clyburn, former commissioner at the FCC and acting chairwoman. She first became head of the FCC in May of 2013. She was nominated by President Barack Obama, and this followed her second appointment to the Federal Communications Commission. She began her public service career at the FCC in August of 2009 after spending 11 years as a member of the Public Service Commission of South Carolina, representing the state's 6th congressional district. She served as chair of the PSC from July 2002 through June 2004. Prior to her service on the PSC, Commissioner Clyburn was the publisher and general manager of the Coastal Times, a Charleston, South Carolina-based weekly newspaper that focused primarily on issues affecting the African-American community. She co-owned and operated the family-founded newspaper for 14 years. A longtime champion of consumers and a defender of the public interest, Commissioner Clyburn considered every commission proceeding with an eye on how it would affect every American. She was a strong advocate for enhanced accessibility and communications for disabled citizens, and worked closely with representative groups for the deaf and hard of hearing. She pushed for affordable universal telephone and high-speed internet access, greater broadband deployment and adoption throughout the nation, and transparency and regulation. And of course, I had an incredible honor to work with her during her first term as FCC Commissioner. So I want to welcome Commissioner Clyburn. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And then we also have with us Larry Irving. He's the CEO of Irving Group. He's also a board member of ENA, which is a board member of INCOMPAS. Larry Irving has a passion for bridging the digital divide in the United States. He currently serves on the board of ENA and is the CEO of the Irving Group. In the 1990s, Larry worked to help produce the first empirical study proving the existence of the digital divide. In fact, he really coined the term. Many people give him credit for that. This groundbreaking research sparked global efforts to begin bridging the divide and continues to be widely cited today by those studying internet access around the world. As the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information and administrator of the NTIA during the Clinton administration, Mr. Irving helped establish some of the earliest and most foundational U.S. domestic and international internet policies, including those supporting universal internet access, private investment, competition, open access, and light touch regulation. He subsequently commissioned a comprehensive Census Bureau survey that quantified for the first time the U.S. communities and populations that did not have internet access, and he diagnosed some of these causes. This research was documented in a seminal series of reports that he co-authored, Falling Through the Net. This research showed that Americans most at risk for access inequity were communities that could not afford to fall further behind, including the following: rural, low income, single parents, the elderly, ESL speakers, and others who were otherwise economically or educationally disadvantaged or geographically distant. Larry's data helped provide support for legislative initiatives such as the E-rate program, and in conjunction with NTIA's Telecommunications and Information Infrastructure Assistance Program, it also demonstrated the growing importance of the internet for all communities. TIAP connected schools, libraries, hospitals, and other public access institutions where at-risk communities could access the web for free. So we have with us today two really great experts on the issue that we want to talk about, and that is how do we ensure that our children are not falling behind as we move forward through this pandemic and then in the future and beyond. But before we get into that particular topic, as we've noted before, today is the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act. And I think it's really important to talk to these two experts about their experiences with the Act. Mr. Irving, as you may know, worked on it as a staffer. If you were watching our earlier panel with Senator Markey, he held up a picture and Larry was in that picture. So I wanted to talk to both of you though, in an attempt to achieve the 96 Act goal of connecting every school and every library in the United States through the E-rate program to internet access. What's your perception of the progress that we've made as a country using the provisions of the Act and the E-rate program in particular.
Madam Chair, I'll defer to you.
Well, thank you. Number one, it's a pleasure being here. It's great to see you again, Angie, and it is always great to be on a virtual stage where such a communications icon is Larry Irving. Let me say what is obvious. There are many schools and a host of libraries across this great nation that would be more than a generation or two behind when it comes to advanced services, but for E-rate. It has been a game changer in key areas of this nation that in the other universal service programs have really stabilized and helped grow many communities. Yet too many of those same communities and those adjacent to them are today only realizing are only realizing what I would call a basic concrete floor. Those surfaces are not that smooth. Those playing fields are not that level. And so today, as we commemorate, as we should, that silver anniversary that has been game changing in the industry, we must acknowledge that those foundations were laid on surfaces that were not leveled. And though they brought them up many degrees, when you start up from a disadvantaged place, you may be propelled further by connectivity, but that is not the only series of things, that will make a difference, particularly in the next phases and the current phases where there are too many libraries in particular, schools also, that do not have the expertise to continue to request funding. They do not have those systems in place. And so the advancements that I think we anticipated going further and going onward are not being realized at this point at the exponential pace that we anticipated. So we still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of basics in order for the technologies to catch up with the realities on the ground.
So Angie, first let me thank you and let me thank NCOMPAS. I also want to thank all of the members of NCOMPAS, but my good friend Chip Pickering, who I've known from our mutual days on the Hill. It was that Energy and Commerce Committee created a lot of folks who came out of there to do great things, and I'm glad that at least 2 Energy and Commerce alums are on NCOMPAS's senior staff. I look back at the E-rate. I'm a kid from, born in the projects, went to public schools and public libraries, were the reasons that I was able to get out of my community and have the kind of a life I had. When I look back at the E-rate, I think that program more than anything else has helped level the playing field. As my colleague and friend Mignon has mentioned, we have a lot of work left to do. But when you think about the fact that this nation's invested over $100 billion, 50 billion of it federal money, another 50 billion at least state and local money to connect schools and hospitals and rural health clinics and get people the access that they need, there's more to be done. But think what would happen in this country if we hadn't made that investment. I was in every one of the 50 states was in that NTIA, and then since I worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Library Project and worked with a lot of libraries, we've changed lives with that program. And as much work as we have to do, as important as it is for us to continue to get it right, I don't know how many people would be on the wrong side of the divide and still be living in digital poverty if they hadn't been exposed in schools or hospitals or libraries. And it was so appropriate that we had the signing in 1996 at the Library of Congress, because the original concept of Al Gore was a little schoolgirl in Carthage, Tennessee could access all of the information in the Library of Congress. I got to go to Carthage, Tennessee about 3 or 4 years ago, and I got to go to the library in Carthage, Tennessee. And sure enough, there's a little schoolgirls, a couple of them actually, doing their schoolwork in that library in Carthage, Tennessee, connecting to the world. So if there's $100 billion that I am certain we've spent correctly, that $100 billion to spend federal and state money over the last few years, connecting all of our schools, giving every kid, rural, urban, Native American, Black, white, Latino, red state, blue state, the same opportunity. That's what mattered.
Yeah. So given all of that, do you think that the Telecom Act is well positioned to deal with the changes in technology and where the marketplace is now?
I'll jump in quickly and say, I think, at 25 years old, almost anything needs a retrofit. I've been in my house 15 years. We need to do some things to make it stronger, sturdy, and, shore up some things.
I love that analogy.
And so anytime you've been in a place or in a thing for 25 years, you can improve it. When we were doing the Telecom Act of 1995, 1996, 94, 95, 96. So you and I know we really started in 93, and in 94 it got passed in the House, as Chairman Markey mentioned, and then we didn't get it finally passed until 96. But when we had no idea that we'd be doing 5G spectrum. We had no idea what wireless broadband meant. No one knew we'd have something the size of this. You can't really see it, my iPhone or my iPad, and that would have more processing power than the laptops we had back in those days. There was no social media. We didn't have an Amazon, and most of us weren't sitting anxiously waiting for the next delivery from this company no one had ever heard of 25 years ago. And the point I'm trying to make is the marketplace has shifted, the technology has shifted, international competition has shifted. All of those factors mean that we need to take a look at it. Doesn't mean that we need to throw things out, but it does mean that more of us are more dependent than we ever were before, in ways we never expected people to be dependent before. We've got to make sure that the regulations reflect the current reality. And one other thing we need to do, we need to make sure that we have the security that we need. We had security for institutions. The ransomware attacks on our schools are abominable, but all of us are, one hacker away from a personal or financial or corporate devastation. And so building in the kind of security that we really need in these networks, that's something that's got to be top of mind. And it just wasn't, we all were kind of teletopians. This is going to be perfectly great for everybody. Sometimes bad things happen in good places.
Yeah. And Angie, I think the Act has and will continue to unlock boundless opportunities and possibilities. But I have to say its application and interpretation have been uneven and sometimes not 100% aligned with current priorities. There are some who complain or use its 25-year-old language, I think, as an excuse to stay stuck in time and interpret things too literally, too strictly, and not within, I believe, the bounds of the possibilities. Laws are blueprints, they're snapshots in time. Agencies like the FCC, they have statutes, they have delegated, authorities. There are interpreters and implementers of these tools that we need to adapt, adjust, and act. And the times call for us to adapt, adjust, and act like never before. So I will say, I won't disagree with Larry that, most things 25 years old, occasional wine, bottle of wine or two, maybe the exception, will deserve to a review and a refresh. But I also believe that those who are interpreting, the Act and are implementing its substance and its possibilities need to look in the mirror to make sure that they are coloring a little bit outside the lines in order to ensure a connected future for us all.
Like you mentioned that the Act sets forth purposes for the FCC to fulfill, right? And one of them was E-rate. And there has, as we've been living through this pandemic, trying to work in school from home, maybe partially from home, depending upon the circumstances, there have been calls for looking at the E-rate provisions and viewing them in light of classrooms are no longer in the school per se, right? They also are in people's homes, and there's a real need to use the E-rate funding right now to provide that connectivity at home for students and teachers who do not have those connections. So we know that there are a number of petitions pending at the FCC. Acting Chairwoman Rosa Morsel just put them out for public notice. So let's talk about that for a little bit. What do you see? How do you see that playing out? What do you think the timeline might be for action that could address these particular concerns about the number of students who still remain disconnected and not able to engage with their learning from home right now?
Angie, I can walk literally across the street and you will hear some noises. My parents opted to stay in a neighborhood that is changing and changing economically and changing in ways that we didn't anticipate 25 or so years ago. So those digitally malnourished is what I opt to mention today. I could walk up the street and I could see the result of that. You know, I can walk up the street. Literally, the elementary school I went to is less than a block up the street. But I can say that those students who are having a hybrid or a blended learning model, they're losing ground because of strict and I think unjust interpretation, of what a classroom is. A classroom is not it's to me it's never been from 7 to 3 anyway. Learning should not stop and that should not be strictly defined, but surely within this climate we need a broader interpretation. And I had a chance to look a little bit at what the Colorado AG filed back in September, and he reminded us of what the Telecommunications Act requires the commission to do, and it should consider the extent to which such services are essential to education, public health, or public safety, and that they are consistent with the public interest, convenience, and necessity. Talked about Section 254C3, which authorizes the FCC to get this, to designate additional services for such support mechanisms for schools. It even gave, the FCC even recognized this back in its 2014 E-rate order. And Congress explicitly gave the commission specific authority to alter the definition of services from time to time and provide different definitions for schools. It should do that. It must do that, especially during a crisis. So that is what I mean about interpretation and implementation. It is not single dimensional. It should not be so confined that we allow those children that live 2 doors up who may not have a stable connection to not have the learning they need, even when we go back to school full time.
Yeah, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of the gentlewoman from South Carolina. Everything she said, I agree with. But it's in some ways it's more fundamental than that. There were a few people who opposed the E-rate when it first came out, and I thought they were wrong then. And I think the interpretation of the last 4 to 6 years that you couldn't extend the E-rate, particularly the last 12 to 18 months, you couldn't extend the E-rate to homes. I think that's just misguided. The reality is we've lost a year of children's lives. And how does a 3rd grader or a fifth grader ever catch up from a year loss? And, I don't live in South Carolina, I live in Washington, but I grew up in New York City. And I grew up in the inner city of New York City, Hollis, Queens, a home of hip hop and rap, Run DMC, LL Cool J. That's my neighborhood. A lot of those kids were already a year or 2 years behind when we entered this pandemic. Too many of those kids don't have broadband at home. We made $100 billion investment in connecting every school and every library. Why we wouldn't leverage that investment and do what we can to get technology into the homes of those children, I'll never understand. Particularly when we know that we'll never catch up. I believe that Chairwoman Rosenworcel, Jeffrey Starks, I have no idea with the other two commissioners, but I have talked and heard the two Democrats on the commission, and I know that they're leaning into the proposition that they have the authority, and they're also leaning into the proposition if they don't have the authority, they can go to Congress and ask for the authority. But I think industry, parents, educators, state and local officials, you can't talk to anybody who doesn't believe now that every child in America needs to have access to broadband, meaningful broadband in their home. Whatever education looks like in 2023, it won't look like what education looked like in 2019. And we have to make sure that our most vulnerable, those kids who most need this access, gain that access. The E-rate is a relatively easy way to do it. Most of us who looked at it believe that at best it's a jump ball as to whether or not the law allows it. It's probably, I would say it's decisively that the act does allow it. But I also say that when you look at the members of Congress, again, Republican and Democrat, red state and blue state, they all want to see their children get educated. And one of the things I hope will come out of this pandemic is what Chairman Markey and President Pickering were talking about earlier today. Chip's a rural Mississippian conservative Republican. Ed's a urban Democrat from Boston, Massachusetts. But when you watch them together, you know that they work together in a nonpartisan fashion for years on the Hill. We need to bring that nonpartisan spirit of cooperation back. During a pandemic, when our children are suffering, let's figure out how to get this done.
Yeah,
Angie, I am
so right about that.
Angie, I was influenced by a number of entrepreneurs, and who one gave me some advice. I didn't listen to anything else he said, but the one thing that stuck with me, and I will ask for it to be liberally applied here. He said, if you have a decision, when I was headed to the FCC, if you have a decision to make and things appear to be even, or there might be some uncertainty, you should always err and make a decision and move into the direction on the side of right. We should move in the direction, regardless of what the final verdict is, in a pandemic, and when we see a crisis, which incidentally, we saw this before the pandemic. We knew this existed, these divides existed before the pandemic. I say, be big and be bold, and connect these communities and give these children maybe the only chance they have to catch up.
Yeah. Well, Senator Markey made a point that this is 25% of our population, these children who need access, who need the ability to continue to progress in their education. They're 100% of our future, right? So as a country, this is an investment in our own future, and being bold and taking action now is critical to securing our own future. So I'm very hopeful that Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel acted so quickly to put these petitions out for public notice, and then hopefully she can move very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about what Congress could do. What more could they bring to the table? Senator Markey has introduced the Emergency Educational Connections Act. That's a plan of $4 billion to add to E-rate. So this is over and beyond, the $2.5 to $3 billion spent annually on E-rate. What do you think the prospects are for that kind of a legislative solution? Can we see a bipartisan approach and an adoption of that, recognizing that the money in E-rate really isn't sufficient to address the whole need here?
I'll speak since it's my former boss. Ed is really, really good at building nonpartisan coalitions on behalf of progressive progress. I don't want to say progressive because I don't want to make it political, but in terms of creating progress in these kinds of issues. As you may have remembered when Ed was talking today, he was talking about $4 billion or $5 billion or $8 billion. The reality is we need serious dollars. And I do think we're going to get those dollars. And I want to separate out these dollars in a couple of different ways. Almost a year ago, I wrote an article saying we needed to rethink Lifeline and create a pool of money, based on the Lifeline program, which is dollars per month toward some form of telecommunication service, and give people access to broadband. And the emergency broadband money from last year basically builds on that kind of a concept. Let's give people money in their pocket now to go out and purchase services that they need. And we need those services. We need them for a period of time, but we also need significant dollars into E-rate. We need significant dollars into building out our broadband infrastructure. And we need to look at what do we need to do now, what do we need to do medium term, and what do we need to do long term. And now we need to get everybody in America connected, particularly every home with a child. Medium term, we need to find ways of investing money that builds on the investments we've made. If we've connected our schools, we've connected our hybrids, we've connected with the $285 million that's there to connect historically Black college and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, all of those monies combined can help create lasting infrastructure for communities that need, so that we don't have to keep ponying up $50 a month. So we need $50 now, need to invest so that we have affordable, accessible infrastructure in the medium term. And then we've got to make sure that our laws promote competition and investment, so that longer term, we will have affordable, competitive options for our constituencies. If we look at that 1, 2, 3 kind of an approach, I think we can get there. And I do think Congress is leaning into it. And I do hope it'll be nonpartisan. Like all of us on this call, we probably have all visited 40, 50 states. Whether you go to Navajo Nation, or you go to Pikesville, Kentucky, or you go to Cut and Shoot, Texas, or you go to Hollis, Queens, looking into a child's eyes who doesn't have access to the internet, looking to the parents' eyes who just wants the best for their children, I can't believe that members of Congress won't lean into that concept, that every one of these American children, 100% of our future, there's 100% of our attention right now. The learning loss over the last year has been substantial. We've got to undo what we've lost over the last year and then sprint forward to a future that's better than where we are.
I cannot say it better. And so I'll just say it I'll just say it my way. We need to get rid of the conjunction "or" when it comes to this, and move to "and," because "and" is needed in so many ways. No 1, 2, or 3, pathways to connectivity are going to take care of the rural, suburban, and urban divide. Our communities, our institutions they're just not created equal. So we're going to need a number of formulas, methodologies, programs, partnerships, a lot of creativity and all of the above approach when it comes to bridging these gaps. And we need to stop simply looking at what the dollar figure is being enunciated, and looking at what the cost will be if we don't. We have a tendency in this nation, regrettably, to look at that particular snapshot in time and not look at the full formula of what that will deliver. Again, an "and" is a plus sign. If you put this in place after the equal sign, you will get hopefully greater than you did, you had before. And so, these are the types of, I think, this is the posture that we, regardless of party, regardless of where we're from, the rural urban friction when it comes to these, these dollars, they need to go away. I'm almost on the verge of saying, those funds, as it relates to what they're called and where they're flowing, should go away. It should go to where the need is the greatest. It should go to bridge these divides. And I really think in some ways we've had a negative self-fulfilling prophecy in pretending like these divides are just in 1, 2 or 3 parts of this nation. They are not. They are painfully ubiquitous. And so we need to really take that approach and recognize that this is an investment, not just a budgetary catastrophe. The catastrophe is not investing in people and allowing them to be able to, if those of us from the South and that might go to church more than once once every 10 years, will say, help me to fish. I don't want your fillet of fish. I want to be able to fix and capture and prepare my own. And this is unfortunately, at least in the past, we have not been looking through those types of lenses. It's time now for us to do so.
Angie, I'm married to a pastor, so I spend a lot of time hearing these fish analogies. When she's a later in life pastor, so I actually want to get her pastoral degree and listen to her sermons. So I hear what my friend is saying. But there are a couple of points I also want to add. As rich as this country is, we don't have infinite resources. And one of the things that I'm really proud that this FCC is rethinking is the whole question of mapping and getting the broadband mapping right. That you always want to do ready, aim, fire, not ready, fire, aim. And we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars on rural broadband, and we need to spend that money, but we haven't gotten the mapping things right. And I know that Congressman Markey and Congresswoman Eshoo, Senator Markey and Congresswoman Eshoo introduced a broadband mapping bill, and that's important. What's also important is, I'm on the board of ENA. I talk to a lot of folks around the country involved in schools who do the application with the E-rate and rural health clinics and other things. If we can figure out ways to make that process a little less painful for folks as we're doing this, right. This shouldn't be an exercise in bureaucratic resilience or bureaucratic exhaustion. It should be a product of how do we get the money to people they needed in a fashion that is protective of the interest of the taxpayer, but that gets that money out there to do what it's intended to do, which is connect schools and teachers and classrooms and libraries and medical practitioners to the American people.
And anybody who spent more than 5 minutes at the FCC really looking at the universal service model and those intended to benefit, if you speak to those who need it the most, they will tell you that that is a very scary, painful, and difficult application process. It is getting better, but it's still painful, difficult, and so we need to, we need to face that. We need to, as Larry mentioned, we have an obligation to ensure that the money is spent wisely, but we also have an obligation to not have these hurdles so difficultly high that, smaller school districts, like, 2 counties over, are not equipped and almost are fearful of applying because one mistake. And there are a couple of districts, they talked to me when I first got on the FCC. They came to me and said, can you help us? We made a mistake. We absolutely did. We got rid of that person that made a mistake. They made big mistakes, a couple of them. But it shouldn't be a life sentence because, see, the life sentence is not to the applicant, it's to the students and those in the community. They're the ones that suffer from a lifetime. And a lifetime, if it's 3 or 4 years, that's a lifetime in terms of, graduating or moving from one level to another. So we really need to, I'm not saying amnesty in the purest sense, but we really need to look at the entire model. And it needs restructuring, it needs reframing, and it needs resuscitation. It needs a lot of things, but it needs to get to the people who would benefit the most. And I'm sorry, I can't sit here before you and say that that is happening in a manner in which we would rejoice.
And we know there are hardworking people who are well-intentioned, who are following the rules as they were given, who are doing these, looking at these applications. But if we really want to, if we're looking at this holistically, among the things that need to be done, we need to make this a less painful process. We need to make this less intimidating process. We need to protect the taxpayers' dollars, absolutely. But there's got to be ways to do it so that small towns and folks don't have to go out and hire, a person full-time just to make sure that this is done correctly. And because a lot of places just don't have that. You know, when you go to Tennessee, you go to Idaho, you go to, you know, inner city communities, and these folks just want to get their kids educated and connected. And instead they're afraid to apply, or when they apply, they're almost catatonic because if I make a mistake, I'm hurting my constituency. We can do better by those folks, and we should.
You want to talk a little bit about what you've been working on with ENA and addressing the homework gap there?
Yeah, you know, it's been fun. There's some really talented people there, and the ability to ideate and to really think creatively about what the future is going to look like has been one of the joys of the last 6 months. And with all the pain, the one thing that a problem does is it makes people pull together and start thinking about what they can do creatively. I love the concept of to and through. I'm also on the board of Shelby, Schools, Hospital, Library, Broadband Coalition, representing EA on that board. And you know, Shelby, Encompass, and others are really talking about the need. We have these investments, we have these schools connected, we have these libraries connected, we have these rural health clinics connected. Can we leverage those connections and use EBS or CRBS or LTE spectrum to light up those communities and give people affordable access? That's exciting. It may not be perfect for everywhere, but it, you know, I know where I grew up in Queens, there was a library down the block, there were schools over here, there's another library a few doors down. Basically, everybody I was in elementary school or junior high school with in New York City, if those schools had the capacity to give us a wireless connection, every one of us would have had a MiFi or an antenna at home and could have done our homework at school. That's going to be good. We're working with school districts right now to figure out how we can best figure out the path forward using these new kinds of wireless solutions. We hope that in rural areas with little no broadband, we can give more access to their kids using these technologies. I've been talking to folks at HBCUs and trying to connect ENA to some of the historically Black college universities, tribal colleges, Hispanic serving institutions that can benefit from the $285 million in that plan. Because again, if you're looking at Hispanic serving institution, if you're looking at a historically Black college, they're almost always near their communities. So whether you're looking at Clark or Spelman or Howard or Morehouse, they're right out, Johnson C. Smith, Fisk, they're almost always right next to communities that are underrepresented. So we can do that. We're working with folks to get cellular hotspots and LTE Chromebooks and school buses into communities that need that kind of help, and that's exciting. And then we have a new learning platform, Catch On, and we're helping school districts identify the students that are having access, having problems accessing online resources. I was on a call last week at the University of Virginia, and I'm really excited by this, and it's something that I hope that ENA and other organizations can tap into. The University of Virginia is looking at lessons learned during this pandemic. The pedagogical approaches to learning are changing rapidly. So as universities and others try to figure out what kind of kids are benefiting, what kind of kids are falling further behind, what teaching methods are bringing kids in, those are the kinds of things that ENA, using our software component Catch On, we can lean into those kinds of questions, and we should. And then we're working with schools to make sure that we ensure the safety of student data. There's so much data out there, and all of us know the frightening nightmare that happens when personal data gets into the wrong hands. If you saw the 60-minute surveys about the health data that's been floating around and who's tapping into that, but if we can't secure our children, protect their data, we're missing some steps. That ENA is working on that. Bad actors are using this pandemic to go after schools for ransomware because those schools are so much more important. And we're helping schools improve their networks and improve their security. So there's a lot going on. You know, I'm you know,
it's impressive.
Well, you know, the good thing is that Chairwoman Clyburn and I have had the benefit of doing jobs we've loved and then graduating into, you know, lives after public service that allow us to continue to focus on the kinds of public service that we care about. I mean, I'm never going to not care about kids, but with and being associated with a corporation that every day, everybody in that corporation's focus is on connecting the unconnected and keeping them connected securely, that's a pretty good gig.
No, and I totally agree. I know I can't weigh in, you know, because you know, Larry is light years ahead of me in so many ways. But you know, I will say
older.
Yes, you are that.
I am.
You know, but I'm sorry that those in the audience did not have a benefit of hearing the age discussion, nor should you have. But this really forces us, and this is, I will say, when you talk about lessons learned, and opportunities, before us, it is forcing us to be incredibly unsiloed, which we should be. It is forcing us to redefine what a P3 is, and maybe it's a P5, and so, these are the things that, in times of crisis, when all of us are forced to be incredibly, creative, that what going forward, as we continue to heal and recover, that we do not go back to the ways before, because not all of them were perfect. We want better health and opportunities, but we also want to, as Larry said, learn from those divides and fissures, and all of these other challenging adverbs and and adjectives that we painfully can see every single day, that we build, and I'm not going to get political, but we build things in a more sustainable way. How about I say it that way? In a way that will allow all communities to thrive.
Sustainability is important.
The important part again, and I spent my life on the Commerce Committee, as at least two of us did, when none of these issues were partisan. They might have been geographic, they might have been representational of a particular community of interest in the district, but it wasn't about I'm Republican or I'm Democrat, I'm rural, I'm urban. It's about what's best for the nation writ large. And that's what we, I know from ENA's perspective, we deal with all kinds of folks from all kinds of different political persuasions, and we don't care. If they want to help the kids, we want to help them. But I think, and I know the Encompass is the same way, and we need our policymakers to lean into the fact that we have a problem. We have a problem that not enough kids have access to the tools that they need to be contributing members of our society when they graduate from the schools they're graduating from. And we have a solution. It's connecting every one of those kids and spending a little bit of money now, an investment now, that's going to benefit every American later. We did it with lighting. We did it with energy. We have to do it with we did it with the telephone. We have to do it with the internet. And I don't know how we've gotten to the point now where there's even, kind of a debate about this. If we don't do this now, when will we get it done?
Yeah, and how far behind will our nation become vis-a-vis other nations, and what lost economic opportunities will there be for the children who one day will be the adults and will be running the country? I mean, it's a frightening thought, right? If we don't make the investment now. So I do have one more question, and I went over and looked at the Q&A, and I didn't see any questions from the audience. So when I ask this question, I would, if there are any questions from the audience, go ahead and stick it in that Q&A. And that is, as we think through making some of these solutions more permanent, perhaps doing that through the USF, perhaps doing that through congressional action, adding money into universal service needs. Any thoughts that you might have about the commission undertaking the much needed contributions reform of the USF portion? So this is for most of our audience probably knows, but the contribution factor has been rising and rising significantly, especially over the last few years, for a variety of reasons. Some because services that there just aren't as many people taking the services that are contribute, and then we have quite a bit of discretion by the companies in terms of what they deem as telecom services that pay in versus those that do not. So there's a number of factors that are going on that are causing the contribution factor to rise. But it is a time to really look at contributions reform and get it done.
Yes.
And what's the risk? What's the risk if we don't do that sooner rather than later?
I could stop there. Look, here is what we're not facing and what we are not properly acknowledging. The current USF contribution regime is inequitable, unsustainable. It traditionally has been funded by interstate long distance carriers. Who and what is that anymore? But another consequence, this is what we have to remind ourselves. Another consequence, and this is not a negative, of the 96 Acts is that USF does not just fund any more low-income housing, but telecom services. It does not just simply fund services in high-cost areas. As we mentioned, it funds rural health telecommunications needs and services. We mentioned more than one time E-rate, the schools and libraries program. So we rightly have evolved in terms of what USF does for us, and the definition of advanced telecommunication services has rightly evolved, but the mechanism to fund it has not. In fact, not only hasn't, but it's shrinking. That denominator is shrinking. And so we need to really I was going to say something that your wife would not approve, but we really need to grow up, have adult conversations about who and what should be a part of that contribution, mechanism, that denominator. We really need to affirm who are the beneficiaries, because there are more beneficiaries than interstate long distance, so we need to, that burden should not go strictly there, because the benefits, are abound. So we need to have these discussions. We need to stop going to, I think, a very inappropriate incendiary refrain of taxing the internet. That we need to take all of those that wording and those types of refrain off the table, and really look at how contributions should be assessed, how the system can be approved. NARUC has been talking about this. The recovery, factors and issues, when it comes to contribution from consumers. We really need to have an adult conversation about what is next, because honestly, what is now is a problem, and I don't care who's not talking about it. This is not sustainable. And one day we're going to wake up, and there really is going to be an implosion, and we should act now before that day comes.
Yeah, so one of my observations, I know I'm a moderator, but I'm going to be a panelist for just a second. One of my observations is that it's uneven in terms of the services that are paying in. So for instance, NCOMPAS's members, many of them are purchasing broadband services, selling broadband services to businesses, and those services largely pay into USF already. So to the extent that we're discussing one of the options being including broadband internet access service for consumers, it seems appropriate. And then, there are other potential reforms that have been on the table at the FCC for a long time. Should they go a connections-based approach or a numbers-based approach or some kind of a hybrid. approach? And the state members of the joint board have given their opinion that it should be more of a hybrid situation, with consumers paying based on connections and businesses paying based upon the revenues portion. So, there have been lots of ideas. The commission's had a proceeding pending forever. I think the proceeding's older than my children, and one of them's in college already. So, it's I would agree with you that it's time. Commissioner, you were acting chairwoman for about 6 months, right? This is not usually something that an acting chairperson would do. Any thoughts about, are there ways that maybe the acting chairwoman could tee up the issue so that the record is refreshed, reformed?
I believe so. Number one, it's so interesting. Larry will know this. And Angie, you missed this part of the fun in our office. Every 2 weeks we would hear that Tom was coming, but 2 weeks turned into 5.5, 6 months. And so, what, and so, use that, if that's the norm, because it was 6 months before, before Julius transitioned in. Look, you attorney, I'm not an attorney. You guys always talk about precedent and, past is prologue and all of that. Use this as a shining example to really, I believe, make a difference and make the hard decision that seemingly, this is no disrespect to anybody that's gone before, that the permanent chairs, can't ever seem to get around to. There are a lot of fires to put out, by the way. There are a lot of, issues before us. But this never seems to make it to the priority list. An interim chair could do that. And what's the consequence? You're more likely to be able to save the planet, in terms of, connectivity, be a part of history, ensuring that this is on more stable footing. Well, you're going to take a couple of knocks or two for those who want to continue with the old refrains. But I really think, especially what we've been taught over the last 11 months, there will be more people than not that would appreciate at least moving in this direction. And I think, I hope I don't lose a friend, but I think the acting chairperson should go right ahead and do it, be bold, and do something that no one else has done before. Am I sounding like Star Trek? But yes, just go boldly.
Don't go where no man or woman has gone before. I agree on the urgency. I agree she needs to lean forward. The question is whether or not you can develop consensus, because with the 2-2 vote, so teeing it up certainly and starting to drive toward that consensus. And in my perspective, and I think perspective of everybody listening and talking on this panel, if we can get a consensus that's non-political, that's nonpartisan, that's ideal. I don't know the newest commissioner, Mr. Symington, at all, and I don't have a sense of where Commissioner Carr is on these issues, but I can't believe that acting chairwoman Rosenworcel, as long as she's dealt with these issues, as much as she knows about these issues, isn't leaning into at least beginning to tee them up. I mean, think if we roll back, and you started the conversation, Angie, we were at 7%. Now we're at 32%. It's almost a 5x. That is not sustainable. That's disastrous. And it creates all kinds of dislocations. It creates all kinds of problems within the system. We need to fix it. And I also believe that I'll get this out there, and I apologize to my friend who's to anybody on this call who's related to a member of Congress. Appropriations is not the right way to fix some of these issues, because I am a huge believer that the appropriation process does not work optimally right now. Can I put it that way? I won't say what I've said in the past, that it's broken. I'll just say that right now it's not acting optimally. And
so Larry, I will whisper this because I think somebody is in the other room that you might, but you're right.
And so we need to get this fixed at the commission. Congress wants to get it fixed at the commission because they know that appropriations isn't going to make it work. Industry wants it fixed and wants it fixed at the commission. And most importantly, the recipients of these dollars need it fixed, and need it fixed in a way that's sustainable, forward-thinking. If you're a company that's involved in this area, the lack of regulatory certainty makes it hard for some of these companies to go out and raise money. I mean, I'm fortunate, but ANA, it's a good company, it's going forward. But if I was starting this company now, the regulatory uncertainty overhang that lays out there makes it a harder road for companies that are doing things we want them to do. Let's fix this.
Right.
And frankly, many of them are put in the position of trying to make a decision. Is this a telecom service that has to pay it or not? And then the implications of that. And then there are competition issues when you have companies maybe making different decisions, and you have customers that are looking at their competitive options. And if they're seeing different fees that are going to apply, it really can skew the marketplace. So there's a lot here to untangle. But that said, there is a path forward in terms of the substance. It's the political issues that I think we've really got to work on and see if we can find some common ground and push forward with a plan. Well, so you all have been just fabulous. And I'm like looking at the questions, and really it's just a comment, someone who just agreed with us, like it's time to get it done on contributions reform and to include broadband internet access service as a contributing service. And that is definitely one of the options that's been on the table a long time at the FCC. And it seems from our perspective, you want to think through the services that are being supported and the services that are contributing, making sure that's an equalized and fair process. Getting the access to the networks that are supporting all of these fantastic services, that seems to be the right kind of approach. Now it's just, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to implement it? So looking forward to working with the both of you on this issue. And all of you in the audience, really want to thank you for your participation. You have just been great. It's been a fabulous conversation. I know we went over, I really want to thank you for your patience since we went over so much. And I want to remind our audience that we're going to pick it up again tomorrow, 10 Eastern. Hope you plan to join us for the rest of the policy summit. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.